Hello everybody, and welcome to the channel. So I have a serious question for you, and I know it's probably gonna sound dramatic, but it's something I wonder about with every single person I interact with on any kind of regular basis. Why do you like to listen to me talk? No, for real. Why do you take the time to sit where you're sitting and watch me sit where I'm sitting and ramble on about whatever the f? I even wonder this for myself, because I'm the kind of person who likes to think they can listen to anybody talk about anything, as long as it's something they're really passionate about. It doesn't matter if I care about it, but let someone talk for any length of time about something they care about deeply, and anything can become interesting. And I think this is because you can learn a lot about people by the way they talk to you. The words they pick, and the cadence of their speech, and the information they're willing to divulge. How a person talks about things that have happened to them gives you an understanding of who they are. It's true in real life, it's true in movies, and it's true in literature. Think about some of the American classics. Catcher in the Rye, for instance. Now, as much as you may love or hate this book, I hate it so much. Within the first few pages, you know who Holden Caulfield is. The story is told through his eyes, straight from his mouth, as though we were friends just sitting down like you and I. When he's walking around town calling everybody phonies in his head, you might think he's this stupid, obnoxious kid that no one would ever want to read a book about. But the reason you're able to think that is because you know who he is. It might be the worst, but it's the worst because it's so well done. Does that make sense? And I think this is something that's kind of hard to grasp the importance of until you're shown an example that does it really poorly. Enter the actual worst published book I've read in a very long time. The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon. What is the trouble with goats and sheep, you ask? The trouble with goats and sheep is that it doesn't know who its narrator is. See what I did there? Now I'm gonna try to talk about this without getting too upset, because when I was reading it, it really pissed me off. Plot-wise, the novel follows the residents of a little English neighborhood in the 1970s. The adults and the kids, and their struggle to deal with poorly defined statements about God, a questionably pervy neighbor, and the memory of a terrible thing they all did together 9 years ago. Overall, sounds fine, yeah? But the problem isn't with the story. The problem is that I have no idea who's telling me the story. Or more accurately, I have too many ideas about who's telling the story. The novel starts out in the first-person voice of a 9-year-old girl named Grace. As much as the way that's done comes with its own set of problems that I'll get into in a little bit, at least we know who she is. At least we have a narrator. So you're rolling with Grace for the first few chapters and getting to know her best friend Tilly through her eyes, watching her parents interact and whatnot. And then just a little bit into the book, you turn the page, and suddenly, no more Grace. She's nowhere to be found. Instead, we're now being led through the houses and minds of her neighbors by some sort of omniscient third-person nothing that apparently knows everything about everyone. It still isn't gonna tell us the big secret until right up at the end. But the actual voice of the narration doesn't change at all. So it's easy to imagine Grace's spirit leaving her body and astral projecting around the rest of the neighborhood to tell us the story, jumping back into her body every couple of chapters to give us more little kid buddy cop pseudo comedy. As it stands now, we get so little time with Grace as our narrator that we barely get to know her at all. And when we aren't with her, we're basically just adrift in the narrative astral plane. But Adam, you say, there are plenty of great books with an omniscient third-person narrator. And you're right, but by starting this one in first person, you're setting your reader up to desire this connection with the narrator, only to be intentionally thwarted at every turn. Not only that, but a lot of the most successful, enjoyable novels with a third-person narrator have a narrator with a defined personality, that of the author, which still gives us a way to connect in a way that this just refused to. Okay, sorry, I said I wouldn't get heated. But at least we have Grace. As annoying as she is, at least we have someone clearly defined that we can cling to in these troubled times. Right? Wrong. Just because we know who Grace is doesn't mean we know when she is. Now, even though this book is written in past tense, well, not all of it, but I'll get to that in a minute. There are some parts of Grace's narration that sound like they were written only hours after the events in question, i.e., they sound like they were written by a 9-year-old. When standing in a church looking around for a statue of Jesus, she says, "I glanced around and realized there were lots of people standing on pieces of wood looking down on us. It was confusing because they all looked thoughtful and slightly disappointed, and all of a sudden it wasn't really clear at all which one was Jesus." Everything about this sounds like the narration of a 9-year-old. From the confusion confused deconstruction of a thing that all the adults in attendance would be very familiar with, to the language she chooses to use, even down to the sentence structure. This is a child. Just a few pages later, however, and in the course of the story, what's maybe 10 or 20 minutes, she suddenly sounds like an educated adult looking back on the worst summer of her young life. July had found its fiercest day yet. The sky was ironed into an acid blue, and even the clouds had fallen from the edges, leaving a faultless page of summer above our heads. Even so, there were those who still nurtured mistrust. There's no way these were said by the same narrator, at least not at the same time. And don't get me wrong, I think these are both beautiful passages. I really do. But what's the scenario here? Are the first person sections narrated by some far future Grace who's like looking back on her childhood, but then occasionally for seemingly no reason at all other than narrative convenience, thinks it would be cute to mimic the voice of her younger self? And the problem here isn't that this is a confusing question. It's that the book itself has no idea how to answer it, which means the author isn't in control of their narrator. Suddenly, we can't trust anybody to tell us what's going on. And this doesn't even take into account the fact that there are flashback scenes sprinkled throughout the novel that go back 9 years, narrated again from the omniscient third-person god being, but this time they're in present tense. For no reason other than it might be cool to do something different here, I guess, whatever. Okay, we get it. You hated the book. So what am I suggesting you do? Never read this book? Avoid it like the plague? Well, yes. But everything wrong with this book can be boiled down to one simple thing. It doesn't know its narrator. Not just who they are, but where they are and when they are. People tend to think of the narrator as a lens into the story, but the narrator is a character. Arguably your most important character, because it's who we're gonna spend the most time with. So if your narrator is a 9-year-old British girl, you need to know that, and know if she's writing the story in her diary now, or if she's writing a book 20 years after the events. And if your narrator is some centuries-old omnipotent god beast, then honestly, more power to you. But you have to know that. How is it viewing the events? What does it think of the tiny humans? And if your narrator starts out as a 9-year-old British girl and becomes an omnipotent god being, that's a story I want to read. But Adam, you say, what about third person? I realize a lot of what I've said sounds like it only applies to first person narration. But in third person, the narrator is you, the writer. Even if you don't name yourself with pronouns, your voice has to be in there. It has to be recognizable and consistent. So before you sit down to write anything, take the time to think about your narrator. Who are they? How are they related to the story? What do they think and feel about the events? When is the story happening in relation to where they are now? If you can't answer these questions, put your story away and take the time to figure it out. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Left to Right. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments, what's your favorite kind of narrator? Have you ever read a good book with a bad narrator? What's the worst book you've read in a very long time? I'd love to talk about it.